Hello, lovelies. Cory here. Welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, welcome. Happy to have you here. We have a witchy book review for today's video. We are going to be talking about Serpent of Wisdom by Tyson. This was a book I picked up in Idaho when we were out there for our family trip in April. It's taken me a hot minute to get through it. I spent like 2 months reading this book. And the reason why it took me so long is this is a collection of essays, okay, on Western esoteric topics. And I would read an essay and I would sit and kind of digest it for a bit before going on to the next essay. Plus, I've been reading other books in between reading the essays in this one. I have a lot to talk about. I've condensed it down into notes. I don't want this to be a really long, overdrawn video, so we're just going to dive right into it, okay? Tyson is the author of that really popular Necronomicon series, but this is actually the first book of his that I read, and I'm glad that I picked a book that has several different topics in it. You know, each of these essays really spans a wide range of topics, from magical circles to working with spirits. Enochian magic is in there. We talk about divination. We talk about how energy works. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot. And I've really been getting into anthology works like this because you get everything in bite-sized chunks, and then you can kind of run with it from there. So let's talk about the prose for this book, the stuff that I loved. Tyson does a really fantastic job with research, okay? There are a lot of really awesome historical footnotes in here that I took from. I copied down. I was like, I want to research this later. There was a lot of really good background in each of his essays. The essay on guerrilla divination was probably my favorite of all of the essays in here. In that essay, he talks about really just kind of getting bold. And if you like divination systems, if you're interested in the tarot, if you do any sort of card reading or cards, I Ching, if you use the Ogum, if you use pendulums, creating your own divination system from found objects is really easier than I think a lot of us believe that it is. And as an example, he lays out an entire system he created using coins, US coins. You guys, I loved it. I love this system. I like working with it. I've been tweaking it, you know, based on my own style of reading and taste. And now I'm like, what else can I use? That essay really had my mind spinning, and I really enjoyed it. The essay, it was either following that or the after. I don't know if there was one in between the two. It doesn't matter. The essay on the tarot trumps and the ordering of the tarot trumps, Tyson talks about different orderings, you know, of these 22 cards, how they changed over the years, and then his thoughts. You know, he applied his own, you know, opinions on the ordering. And as a pro tarot reader, I found this incredibly fascinating. And again, I took a lot of notes and went back and wanted to research it further and really kind of dive into it a little bit more and just kind of get a feel for, you know, I've been using the Rider-Waite-Smith system for so long that sometimes I forget that this was a card game and that the order of the trumps, because they weren't originally numbered, is really kind of arbitrary according to the creator's intention, right? And how they flowed through that order and how their story goes. So I just, you know, it was something that I found fascinating and I really enjoyed reading it. I love the essay at the end of Enochian magic and the transmissions that, you know, John D. and Edward Kelly downloaded from the angels. And, you know, I liked Tyson's speculation about, you know, maybe the hidden agenda of why the angels would impart that type of information in that magical system in the first place. So I really found a lot of these essays fascinating. There was a really good one on, you know, the fairy godmother figure. There's a good one on the historical associations with the serpent and health and magic. And, you know, it's, you know, keywords that would be associated with the serpent and what it represented, you know, in different traditions. And the essay on spirits' rights, the Spirits' Rights Manifesto, was brilliant. I love it. I am kind of retooling it for my own practice. And I feel like if you work with spirits, reading that essay is really, I think it's definitely going to give you a perspective to chew on. Now, where I struggled with this book, because I did struggle, there were some things that I had a hard time with, as much as all of the things that I, you know, loved about this book. There was an equal amount of things that I really didn't connect with. And one of those things was just kind of in the advertising, you know, of this book. A lot of what is outlined in the back on things that you'll get, you know, we have here practical instructions on the correct casting of a magical circle. In the very first essay on magical circles, I was hooked. I was fascinated on, you know, Tyson's outline of the way that the magic circle was, you know, constructed in the Key of Solomon, which is kind of the first text that we have that outlines, you know, instructions for casting a magical circle. And it's very elaborate, it's very cumbersome. No one would ever follow this. And that's where I agreed with Tyson all the way up until he provides a little bit more of a cohesive, and he does provide, it's still, I feel like, a little bit impractical, but he provides a more practical and condensed version of that circle that ceremonial magicians and practitioners could use today. Where I felt disconnected was when, you know, he touted, in the way that the book touts in the back, is that this is the correct way to cast a magical circle. Not, this would be a more practical way to cast Solomonic, you know, a magical circle from the Key of Solomon. That's not what he says. He says that this is the correct way to cast a magical circle. And for someone who's been casting magical circles for 20 years, that kind of just twinged me a little bit. I was like, okay, we'll agree to disagree. Because my circles have been working just fine. And so that kind of, you know, I glossed over it and moved on. But as we started to get into some of the essays about spirits, that little, like, siren for me kept pinging up a little bit more. So, for example, also on the back of the book, he talks about making and use of a book of spirits. Number one, the practical method that he outlines isn't actually really practical at all. You know, he more outlines the historical method for how this book was constructed, and essentially what a book of spirits is, you know, gathering information from the essay, is that it is a book that was specifically designed by medieval practitioners to summon and bind demons in order to, you know, send them on tasks, essentially turn them into slaves and make them do your bidding. And there's even enchantments that you write in the back of the book that invoke punishments for these demons if they ever break their oath in, being summoned by this, book of spirits, this binding object. And I was like, okay. I read this, and from a historical perspective on what this is and what it was used for, I found the information really fascinating. But where I started to deviate was I felt like discussing that book and even Tyson's musings about, oh, well, if you can bind demons, you can probably bind any good spirit, a benevolent spirit, like your spirit guides, right? And think about that for a minute. Going through the process of creating a book to bind, as in bind to you in slave form, your own spirit guides you've developed special relationships with, right? Who's doing that? Who would do that? I certainly wouldn't do that. And I felt like that was in direct contradiction to the Spirits Right Manifesto that Tyson writes and includes later on in the book, going over the fact that if you are a practitioner that works with spirits, you should probably be working with spirits and treating them as autonomous beings who have their own wants and desires. And, you shouldn't manipulate their will the same way that it would be unethical to manipulate another human's will, right? So I really struggled with that essay. And even in the essay on Black magic, Tyson he starts that essay basically stating that, hey, just me writing on a topic, and anybody writing on a specific topic doesn't mean they're necessarily advocating for whatever they're writing about, right? Writing about something isn't an automatic advocation for it. You're just writing about it. And so I felt like if you're going to put that disclaimer there, why didn't you put the same disclaimer in your Book of Spirits essay? But I also understand that these probably were written at different times in Tyson's career. I don't know that they were all written together for the purpose of putting them in this book. They were probably published in various different, anthologies and then bound together in this book, right? But at least they would have been edited together. And I'm surprised an editor didn't point out, like, hey, this essay doesn't match what you were talking about in this essay, right? I could overlook that too, but the last essay that really got me, and I had to set this book down for like 2 weeks. I was that upset. Like, I really got upset. And it was the essay that talks about spirits, werewolves, vampires. In the back of the book, it's advertised as, Tyson talks about the truth about spirit possession and why you should not fear it. The reality of vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and demons. Y'all. In this essay, Tyson asserts that the reason why we're able to see these non-corporeal beings is because, what's actually happening is they're taking possession, and he uses that word a lot. They're possessing our senses, our sight, sound, sense of smell, etc. They're taking possession of those so that we see, hear, smell what they want us to see, hear, smell, if that makes sense. So the only reason why we're able to see them is because our senses are being taken over. And I'm like, okay, while I understand it, I don't agree with it because that's not been my experience with spirits. And so I really had a hard time with that because, he keeps trying to make a case for the fact that spirit possession is occurring so often that we don't even notice it. So it's not something that you should fear. And I feel like if someone has never had an intentional interaction with the spirit before, that all this essay is going to do is breed fear of working with spirits for that practitioner. That they're, you know, the word possession is so loaded in our culture that I'm not sure that that was the right word to use in the context of this essay, especially if you're trying to, you know, deflate fear around working with spiritual beings, working with spiritual entities, you know, to say, oh, they're actually possessing you all the time, so there's really nothing to worry about. Really don't think that's going to calm anybody down or set aside their fears, right? I think that's actually probably going to breed more fear. So I really, really struggled with that essay. And my personal experience with spirits has been different. I'm a channeler, right? I use pendulums, I use divinatory tools in order to communicate with spirits. That's all been intentional. I've also invoked spirits before in my practice. I've only done it a handful of times, but where I've actually invited them into my body, it has been a possession, you know, under my control, but an actual possession, which feels completely and utterly different than just communicating with the spirit and talking to them or even seeing them or perceiving them out of the corner of your eye, right? I kind of felt like Tyson's explanation for them taking over our senses, right? Like if I'm talking to a spirit of mine, a familiar, where we're just having this exchange of information and I'm seeing them, I'm magically seeing them, right? I don't see that as, okay, you know, David has completely taken over my eyesight. One of my familiars goes by the name of David. You know, David's not possessing my eyes so that I see him. I'm opening myself up to be able to see him. You know, I feel like David or Tyson's explanation for possession would be like me saying that, okay, if me and someone else were standing in a room together and the person turned towards me and said, hey, Cory, that, and me hearing that, hey, Cory, is akin to him possessing my ears. No, I just can hear, I have those channels open, they said something, them saying something isn't an act of possessing my ears. You know, we're not on the same wavelength and same astral plane as spirits. So folks like me who have cultivated and really developed our senses to be able to open ourselves up to hear and see spirits, when we hear and see spirits, it's not a spirit taking us over. It's that they're talking or doing whatever in their realm, and we have developed that sense to be able to pick up those signals. There's not a possession interaction going on there. Again, this is everything subjective, right? This is just my experience of it. Someone else may have a different experience, and I don't think that my experiences invalidate Tyson's whatsoever. But I don't think his invalidate mine either. And yet those essays were written from such a matter-of-fact language to say, oh, this is what's actually happening. Everybody else is just wrong. And, you know, I don't think it's out of the realm of, you know, understanding for me to be offended by that. Right? I had to take a minute and just kind of sit with it and just kind of be like, okay, well, what am I really upset about? Okay, well, it's in contradiction of my personal experiences. Okay, well, does his writing really invalidate those experiences that I have or what I believe to be true about spirits? Well, no. Okay, well, then there's really nothing for me to be too upset about. So once I was able to just kind of like move past it, I picked the book back up again, and I'm glad I did, because some of my favorite essays came after that one. You know, so a really like mixed bag of feelings that I had with this book, but I'm really glad that I read all of it. I got a lot of really great stuff from this book, even if there were a lot of topics and opinions in it that I didn't feel were in alignment with me or my practice, or that I just flat out didn't agree with. I feel like this would be most valuable for someone like me who's been practicing for a while, you know, at least solid in their practice. So even if you've only been practicing 6 months, but you know, have a pretty solid foundation in what you're doing magically, still think you would get a lot out of this book. I don't think that this is a really good book for like beginners or seekers where you want to learn about magic. Like, don't pick this up. I don't want you running for the hills and thinking we're all Looney Tunes, okay? And we're just all out there binding demons and, you know, enslaving spirits to do our will. That's like, no. Don't think that. But where I do think that this is ideal, like I said, is, you know, for folks to use like as a jumping off point for topics to research. I went through a lot of these essays and I got so much information out of the footnotes. Thank you, Tyson, for writing such amazing footnotes. Oh my God. Okay. So look at the footnotes of each of these essays. Look at his references. Look at the appendix. I wrote down so many things that I wanted to go back and research, topics, other, you know, occult practitioners from the 20th and 19th centuries who I want to go back and look up, read their stuff. So books, authors, and just topics in general. Like Enochian magic has always kind of piqued my interest, but now I want to go back. I want to read those transmissions that John Dee and Edward Kelly wrote down. I want to read more about Enochian magic. I even downloaded the Book of Enoch, you know, one of the Apocrypha. It's a book of the Bible that is no longer included in like the formal Bible. But that's the book that kind of is the foundation of Enochian magic. And so, you know, reading this book led me to actually pick up, like this just showed up the other day. This was written by Tyson's wife. This is written by Jenny Tyson, Spiritual Alchemy. And this is about her experiences with Enochian magic, with initiation, you know, an initiation experience with Edward Kelly. Okay. And just her experiences with Spirit Box and other, you know, spiritual tools. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. And so, you know, I ended up picking this one up, and I'll let you guys know how this one goes. But I would say overall, happy I bought this book, happy I read it. Was there some stuff in it I didn't like? Yeah, absolutely. Whew, there was some stuff in it I didn't like. At one point, I almost threw this book across the room, let me tell you. But there was so much more that I did appreciate and I did like, that I'm just overall very happy that I got it and I read it, because I still feel like we get a lot out of techniques and practices and opinions and viewpoints, especially in the magical community, in the occult world, that we don't agree with, right? We still get lessons from those. You know, I am a magically curious person. I research everything. So reading essays that I didn't agree with, still got something from that. I know now what I don't agree with, right? It reaffirms what I do believe and the experiences that I've had backing that up. And I now know what other folks in our community are thinking and reading, and can come on here and say, well, this has been my experience, so don't let this, you know, essay or book scare you off, kind of, opportunity to say that. So I do appreciate that. All right, guys, those were my thoughts on Serpent of Wisdom. Rambled a little bit longer than I intended to, but that's okay. If you read this book, let me know what you think. Do you agree with my opinions? Do you think that that's complete rubbish and this is like the best book you've ever read? Or do you think that this was absolutely not worth your time? What are your thoughts on this book? And would you pick it up and read it if you haven't yet? Just want to hear from you guys. All right, loves, that is it for this video. I will catch you in the next one because more book reviews are coming, okay? All right, loves, we'll see you in the next video. Until then, blessed be.